Giulio, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us, mate. The man in yellow. I've got a couple of supporting props for our chit chat.
I think we're matching, yeah? So you brought me
Yeah,
to talk about
exactly.
social selling, right?
So, just the idea of cold calling tips is what I'd love to hear from you, mate. I've listened to a bunch of your calls. They are absolutely priceless. The throw the phone out the window, this, and so many great little one-liners. But if you don't mind, mate, for anybody who hasn't heard of you or seen you before, do you mind telling us who are you? Why do you do what you do? Why do you call yourself the weirdest cold calling trainer? Yeah, a little intro would be great, mate.
Well, basically, let's start with the fun parts. I think weirdest cold calling trainer is because sales training is so saturated, right? Like everyone is like, if you go on LinkedIn these days, everyone is the best, the most expert, the smartest, the most experienced. Everyone has got 17 exit from a startup, and it just kind of gets repetitive, right? Your brain switches off to it. When you see the weirdest cold calling trainer, you'd be like, what is this guy about? Then you see the yellow glasses, attire, you think, okay, this guy's really crazy. And then luckily the calls help a little bit. So I do cold calling training. I know, like specifically for SDRs or founders or people that need to actually cold call. And I've done it for 11 years. That's why most of my hair is missing, a bit of the wrinkles. And so I enjoy making LinkedIn content and cold calling at the same time.
Amazing. And so for 11 years, have you been doing the training piece? How did you start with this? What made you realize, this is what you wanted to keep doing? What was that trigger point, that inspiration moment?
Oh, well, look, I was in corporate for 9 years doing cold calling for like a company, and our previous business was built entirely on cold calling. I think I sent 10 cold emails in 9 years and maybe like 5 LinkedIn messages. It was just like you called them until someone dies. Literally, that was the main strategy of the business, and it worked. So the business kept growing. So I was like, okay, this works. And then I turned into a sales trainer. And when I turned into sales trainer, I tried to learn cold emails, DMs, etc. And again, another one of the things that probably most of the founders or people that are here can figure out is that everyone tries to do everything, right? Like whenever you start a business, you have a SaaS company, whatever it is, like, oh, we do everything. We go, everything is on the roadmap. We'll do all the services, and the niche you go, the more likely you are to be successful. So that's why I started to narrow down on the things I knew best, that at the same time I saw that the market really wanted as well.
Very cool. Very cool. So there's a bunch of questions we have here, but I want to start just to make sure that everybody who's listening appreciates, I guess, the hurdles that people have to jump up through so that they can be effective cold callers. One of the things that I've listened to in your cold calling scripts is that you really try to dive into the relevance of you and your training before pitching your training. Look, a lot of the things I hear are that things are not going well in XYZ area. So what are the biggest challenges that you notice for people who are meant to be doing cold calling today, but are not getting good results?
I think like my actual pitch is a problem-based pitch, and it's tailored around the two biggest problems I continuously see with teams. And the first one is that there's this cold call reluctance, right? People don't want to do it. It's not, they don't want to do it because it's not effective. We don't want to do it because our brain is wired for the last hundreds of thousands of years that social rejection is a killer. Because that's how it used to be. If you were ostracized from your culture, you were essentially dead. Even these days, if you're ostracized from your circle of friends, family, life is not very good for you. So the social rejection, even in the mildest form, is something we don't like. And what I've seen is that when I was starting my job, that was the job. You would get hired and you would have to cold call all day. And there weren't many complaints about it because the generation before was done that way. If you didn't want to do it, you would leave or you'd be fired. Now that because the job market is a bit more fluid, the companies haven't adapted to the fact that they should be making it easier for people, or more fun, I would say, for people to cold call. Because if it's a really hard task, you don't want to be just walking around like with a whip in your hand. Come on, guys, if you cold call, you get fired. Because then you develop therapy culture, no one, and people will leave. So I think the balance is that people don't want to do it as much because they have more options. And secondly, companies haven't adapted by creating a more fun environment and a more, let's say, like it should be like the fun competition. So that's problem number one, is the cold reluctance and the culture around it. And then problem number two is that because there is a lot of cold calling, people are not necessarily super receptive to it. Now you can call people's mobiles that you couldn't do when it was in my days. Like you would go for landlines. So people will literally, my phone will start ringing and it might be a cold call. And then obviously you need to be able to work with that. So if you start your call with like, hey, my name is Giulio Segantini and I'm the best cold calling trainer in the world because of this, blah, 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 the person is going to hang up on you most likely. And so the other problem is that there isn't that level of training and skill set to make sure that you can cold call effectively.
So how do you make it fun? How are you going to speak to a team of people who are reluctant to go do cold calls and be like, watch me make it fun?
Well, actually, this is the interesting part, right? I don't make it fun. They do. In the sense that the first thing I do is that I literally will task them or I talk to them. So how can you make this? How can you create your own rules? How can you make this a bit more fun? How can you create some fun competition? And I literally empower the team. It's called, I don't know if, do you know the IKEA effect?
The IKEA effect?
Yeah, like you know the Swedish company, right?
Yeah.
They're the only company that gives you the furniture that you have to assemble, which sounds crazy to me, right? You pay to assemble your own furniture, but people love it because they build it themselves, so they feel it's theirs, right?
Right.
And it's the if they build their own environment with the support of the managers, with some little rewards, like maybe we get dashboards to have mini competitions. We talk about the rejections, because that's the other thing, like people are so scared of being rejected, and yet the best cold callers in the world probably have like a 10% conversion rate. The best in the world. Even I don't always have. Actually, like because I do a service training, which is not as easy to spot. There's a need. Probably my conversion is more around 5%, right? And so like it's not that easy. So like if you're gonna get a lot of this, so you gamify it a little bit. That would be the part, and you let the team be in charge of that. So it's not about you forcing them, but it's them creating their own environment.
I love that. I love that. I remember there was a back when I used to have to do this. We did one where we would put we try to sneak in as many animals as we could into the pitch, and so we had like 15 of our salespeople on the floor. It's like, hey, sorry to badger you. Wanted to talk about the elephant in the room. Look, I know you want to get the lion's share. I don't want to snake around the point here, but whatever. Right? Trying to fun little
yes, that's exactly that's exactly the type of game. That's exactly the type of game. Like that. That's like make it a bit fun. And the other thing is, we have this idea that people are so serious, right? If you're making a business call, everything should be so serious. Well, the point is that if most of the world thinks that way, the moment you don't make it as serious, you're probably more likely to break the pattern and therefore have a more interesting conversation. And that's the way you should be thinking about it. You don't want to be like everyone else. Everyone is trying so hard. You're never going to win the best, the most famous, or someone who's always going to be better than you. But you can win in things like the weirdest, you know, and that's the idea.
I love it. I love it. So I've seen a few of your videos, and I've heard some of your ones. I've heard some of your one-liners. But for the people who haven't, give us some one-liners, some openers that can maybe help people feel a bit more comfortable about. You know what? Let's just do some of these fun ones because it'll be a fun little experiment. But something that someone could say to make it less unnerving.
I mean, look, I like the humorous ones, but because my tagline is the weirdest cold calling trainer, right? So like something like throw your phone out the window, things like that, so obviously would make sense. But if I were to look at a standard SDR that's starting, or even a founder that's got to do some cold calls, the number one reason people don't like cold calls is not because they interrupt their day. Because if you pick up the phone, typically you're not having surgery done, right? Let's put it. You might be in a meeting, you might be busy, but that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that people get a lot of cold calls that are not relevant. Because if you picked up your phone and one time out of two, the cold call was relevant, you would want to take all the cold calls because you're thinking, I get new ideas, I can buy new. You definitely would want to. So I typically recommend something like building a really good list beforehand. So making sure that people are likely to be relevant, right? So they should have the problems you fix. And then I'll call them. I'll be like, look, I did a little bit of research. And from my research, it looks like you could be an ideal client. Do you mind if I briefly explain why? And then the person, you're addressing the elephant in the room, that this call is not going to be irrelevant. And then they'll be a bit curious. And you stroke their ego a little bit. So that's one of the ones when I do a very good list, I typically use that one as well.
I like it. I like that. And it also makes the caller a little less nervous because you have done your research. You've got a few points that you can talk about and you're being genuine. You're actually trying to showcase.
Just to clarify, I wouldn't say to research every single client, right? Because the problem is that if you try to adapt your pitch to every single different person, it doesn't work that well. Because your brain is going to be hit by the cold call, like adrenaline, right? The adrenaline rush. Someone picks up the phone. Who is this? And suddenly you got 5 points to talk about. You're screwed. So you should have a list of people that are likely to resonate with your problems, and that's how you tailor your pitch, basically.
So the research could be industry research. It could be something generic for that specific space. So the main problems that we hear in SDR teams, the main problems that we hear in this industry, some kind of generic research. So you don't have to research each individual one. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. I mean, if you can, like, you should look for certain factors. Like, I'll give you a practical example. If you're in recruitment and you're recruiting for software developers, you're going to want to call IT directors. They have a team of X developers, right? And then that's how you categorize them. So, for example, I only call companies that have between 5 and 20 salespeople. That's typically my ideal ICP. Anything above or below that, I just ignore. So when I call them, I can be like, hey, look, I know you're taking some time to build an outbound team, and you might be facing this problem. So that's my relevancy there. And I would always do the list building separated from my calling time. Evening before is a perfect time, or if you can afford it, you get a VA to do it for you. That's the best case scenario.
Perfect. I love it. All right. So look, you've had a productive discussion. They've said that there's a problem. What are some of your favorite closers? How do you get in that deep dive discovery call? How do you get that next step booked in?
So look, the other thing is most people get like, they move a little bit too quickly. I could make a joke about this, but I'll leave it. But they get, I got to close. It's got a problem, I got to close, which is a terrible idea, right? Because the fact that they have a problem doesn't mean they're interested to fix it. Because some people might have problems that they deal with their whole life, right? Or that there might be the right timing, etc. So typically, once you get the problem, you want to drill a bit deeper on that problem before you book the meeting. And even more importantly, you want the person to have some emotional attachment to that problem, because when people get emotional, that's when they make decisions. So it's not like, I've got that problem. Okay, perfect. Let's set some time in the calendar, because that's typically when you get hit with like, can you send me an email first? I would always go. I actually do a mini discovery on the cold call just to make sure that the problem is there, and then only when I figure out that there's enough like understanding of the problem, willingness to fix it, that's when then I'll go for the close.
Okay. So what are some questions you might ask to help open people up and start understanding that emotional connection to the problem?
Well, look, it's simple. You give them 2-3 problems in the pitch, then you understand which one is the priority. And after that, you get an example, because on the example, you can basically get the availability bias that kicks in. And once you can think of a clear example, the problem becomes real. And that's what you really want. And after that, you typically can go deeper in impact, root causes, and try to, okay, so what does that actually mean? Okay, you got this problem, but what does that actually mean to you personally, to the company, etc.? And once, like, you can always get a bit cheeky if they seem a bit fixated. Okay, have you given up fixing it, or have you accepted this is the way things are? And that's typically when they get the most emotional. And then you can get, after that, you just go for the close.
Yeah. I like that one. Have you given up on X? It's always a fun one.
Have you given up? I find even worse is like, have you accepted this is the way things are? Because it kind of like gives that I'm close-minded type of situation.
Right.
So they're both quite triggering to get the person. Also, some people will say, yeah, I've given up. And then what's the point? You know, like you're just going to waste everyone's time.
Right. I see there's a question that's come up. What's the funniest response you've ever gotten from a cold call?
Oh, I had a few. I had one recently. It was really funny. I'm actually gonna make a video about it. And basically, I was like, look, the guy told me that they stopped cold calling. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. At least, you know, you're probably sleeping better at night. And he was like, well, no, not with my wife, I don't. I started laughing. I didn't know what to tell him, right? I was like, what? Another one when I said, throw your phone out the window, was like, do you sell phone repair services? So there were like a few interesting ones that came through.
I love it. And have you ever caught a customer in a bad time? What's an awkward time that you've caught someone?
Like, okay, one time I called the guy and he literally just been diagnosed with terminal illness. And he literally just like, look, I'm in the hospital. I've just been diagnosed with terminal. I don't know why he told me, because I literally never spoken to him. He's like, look, I'm sorry, I'm in the hospital. I've just, I'm not going to be making any business decision anymore. I was like, oh, bloody hell. I was like, I'm really sorry. And that was probably I was like, wow, okay. That was the worst it's probably ever happened in terms of like feeling like crap.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one to get into, let alone out of. Look, I want to sit here for the next 2 hours and keep chit chatting with you. But if you were to give me one more juicy mango, what would it be? What would be one juicy mango you want to leave us without?
I think the one part that we probably haven't touched on that I'm quite adamant about is the objection handling. So people think you handle objections by selling, and you can't persuade anyone. They can only persuade themselves. So the best way to handle objections is to ask questions to let the person uncover the situation themselves and ideally persuade themselves. So if you do things right, you should be challenging objections, not trying to sell your way out, because it just doesn't work as effectively as actually asking questions. That would be my last thing to say.
I like that. Very helpful. Very helpful. And look, I can see there are a few more questions coming through. Is there a way that you'd like people to direct questions to you? Should we set up an email thread? I know there's a bunch more that have come through. How can people get in touch with you?
I mean, usually on LinkedIn, if you my profile is open, you can send me an email for free. You can send me a connection request, but ask the question, the connection request. Otherwise, it's unlikely I'm going to accept it. Sorry.
Awesome, Giulio, mate. Really appreciate your time, man. It was great hearing from you. I look forward to hearing more from you. Have yourself a great rest of your day.